Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever noticed that your mind can become the loudest room in your entire life, yet it's the one room you never learned how to walk out of? We live in an age where our minds run faster than our lives, where we replay old conversations, rehearse imaginary tragedies, and call it thinking. But in reality, it's not thinking, it's drowning. And today I want to tell you something simple yet powerful. You can control your mind. You can stop overthinking. But it begins with understanding that your thoughts are not your master, you are. Overthinking doesn't start because life is overwhelming. It starts because we believe every thought deserves our attention. But the truth, your mind throws out thoughts the way the ocean throws out waves relentlessly, naturally, continuously. You cannot stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. The first step is awareness. Instead of asking, why am I thinking this? Ask, is this thought even true? Because most of what we fear is a story we wrote about a moment that hasn't arrived. The second step is detachment. Let your thoughts pass. You don't have to chase each one. You don't have to argue, analyze, or battle with them. Some thoughts enter only to be acknowledged and released, like a guest who knocks but was never meant to stay. And finally, learn to anchor yourself, not in the past, not in the future, but here, right here, where peace lives. The present moment is the only place your mind becomes quiet enough for you to hear your own soul again. Remember this. You do not heal by controlling everything. You heal by releasing what was never yours. Your mind was meant to serve you, not imprison you. And when you choose presence over panic, clarity over chaos, surrender over control, you finally walk out of the loudest room in your life and into peace. Thank you. Your mind is often compared to a garden, and this analogy carries profound truth. Whatever you consistently plant, nurture, and water will eventually take root and flourish. If you sow seeds of fear, insecurity, and doubt, then naturally your inner world becomes a place where anxiety grows. But if you choose to plant calmness, clarity, gratitude, and trust, your mental landscape transforms into something peaceful and deeply empowering. The mind does not discriminate between what is good for you and what harms you. It simply grows what you repeatedly feed it. This is why becoming conscious of the thoughts you allow to settle is the beginning of mastering your inner world. Most overthinking starts from unconscious mental habits, patterns we repeat without realizing we've been nurturing them for years. A single negative thought is like a weed. On its own, it may seem harmless, but when you water it with attention, worry, and repetition, it grows stronger. Soon, one anxious thought becomes 2, then 5, then an entire forest of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. The garden becomes overrun, and suddenly it feels impossible to find space for peace. But the truth is, the weeds never had ultimate power. They only grew because they were fed. Just as a gardener tends to the soil regularly, your mind needs deliberate care. Thoughts will always appear just like seeds carried by the wind, but you decide which ones take root. You decide what stays, what goes, and what grows. This is where awareness becomes essential. When you observe your thoughts, instead of immediately believing or reacting to them, you begin to recognize which ones you've been unconsciously watering. You become aware of how often you replay old memories, anticipate fears, assume the worst, or magnify tiny concerns into overwhelming burdens. This awareness is not meant to shame you. It is meant to empower you. You cannot change what you never notice. Once you recognize your patterns, you can begin to redirect your attention. The mind naturally gravitates toward whatever you focus on. If You consistently give your energy to possibilities rather than problems, hope instead of fear, growth rather than stagnation. Your inner state begins to shift. It does not happen instantly, just as a seed does not become a tree overnight. But with consistency, your thoughts begin to align with peace rather than panic. The key is understanding that peace is not something you find, it is something you cultivate. Every moment offers you a choice. Feed the thought that drains you or the thought that strengthens you. And controlling your mind is not about forcing yourself to think positive or pretending everything is fine. It's about choosing what you want to nurture. For example, acknowledging a difficult emotion is healthy, but replaying it endlessly is watering the wrong seed. Noticing a fear is human, but feeding it with constant attention is what turns it into overthinking. Your mental garden requires boundaries. Just as you wouldn't allow toxic plants to invade your physical garden, you must learn to stop giving space to thoughts that do not serve your well-being. When a negative thought arises, you do not need to wrestle with it. You simply choose not to water it. Allow it to pass without feeding it. Over time, the thoughts you ignore lose their strength, while the thoughts you nurture grow deeper roots. What you repeatedly choose becomes who you become. A calm mind is not a gift. It is a garden that has been intentionally cultivated. And the most beautiful part, you can start at any moment, every day, with every thought. Every choice to let go of fear and water peace is a step toward transforming your inner world into something spacious, clear, and full of light. Most overthinking begins with attachment to how things should be, how people should respond, how outcomes should unfold, and how life should align with our expectations. This attachment binds the mind to endless loops of analysis, fear, and projection. Detachment, therefore, is not the act of caring less. It is caring more wisely. It is the art of releasing the illusion of control, allowing life to move without gripping it so tightly that your thoughts become suffocating. When you detach, you give your mind room to breathe, and in that space, clarity naturally emerges. Clinging to imagined scenarios is one of the main fuels of overthinking. The mind tries to protect you by predicting every possibility, every outcome, every hidden meaning behind someone's words or silence. But this attempt at control creates the very anxiety we wish to avoid. Detachment teaches you that not everything requires a response, not every feeling needs to be dissected, and not every thought deserves to be held onto. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply let something be. Let it exist without forcing it into a narrative of fear or insecurity. When you detach, you do not become indifferent. Instead, you become more grounded. You begin to see situations for what they are, not what your fears project onto them. You stop assuming, stop predicting, and stop imagining worst-case scenarios. You learn to observe without absorbing. For example, when someone delays replying to you, attachment will make you overthink. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Did I do something? Detachment lets you breathe. I don't have to assign meaning to this. People have their own timelines. This tiny shift releases an enormous mental burden. Attachment often comes from fear of loss, rejection, uncertainty, failure. When you cling to things out of fear, your mind begins to weave stories to protect you, but those stories become heavy chains that trap you in cycles of overthinking. Detachment breaks those chains by reminding you that life is not meant to be forced. What is meant for you does not require exhausting emotional labor to maintain. It flows, it grows, it aligns. When you trust that your mind softens and the noise becomes quieter, detachment also allows you to return to yourself. When you are overly attached to outcomes, you lose your center. Your peace becomes dependent on external things, what someone says, what someone does, what the future holds. But when you detach, you reclaim your own mental and emotional balance. You remind yourself that you are enough, even when situations are uncertain, that your worth does not depend on validation, and that you can handle life even when the answers are not clear. People often misunderstand detachment as coldness or emotional withdrawal. In truth, it is emotional strength. It's the ability to remain kind without losing yourself, to care without being consumed, to love without losing your peace. Detachment makes you more present because you are no longer overwhelmed by what might happen. You begin to accept things as they unfold rather than forcing them into the shape of your expectations. In moments of stress or confusion, try stepping back mentally and emotionally. Allow yourself to witness the situation almost as an outsider. This distance helps you see the bigger picture. You begin to recognize that many of the fears you cling to are temporary storms that will pass on their own if you do not grip them tightly. The mind becomes clearer when it is no longer crowded by exaggerated interpretations and imagined futures. As you practice detachment, you develop inner freedom. You are no longer held hostage by every thought, every worry, every what if. You learn to let thoughts come and go without chasing them. This shift brings peace, not because the world becomes simpler, but because your mind becomes lighter. When you detach, you make space for clarity, resilience, and calm to grow. And that is where the journey away from overthinking truly begins. One of the most liberating truths you can ever realize is that your thoughts are not you. They move through your mind, but they do not define who you are. Just as clouds drift across the sky without altering the sky itself, thoughts arise and fade without changing the essence of your being. Overthinking becomes overwhelming when you mistake these passing thoughts for permanent realities. You begin to believe that every fear is a warning, every doubt is a fact, and every worry is a prophecy. But thoughts are simply mental events, temporary, fleeting, and often inaccurate. When you internalize this truth, you stop fighting with every thought that appears. Most of your stress does not come from the presence of thoughts themselves, but from the weight you give them. A thought only gains power when you merge your identity with it. For instance, the thought "I might fail" becomes "I will fail," and eventually "I am a failure." This transformation happens when you forget that thoughts are just suggestions, not commands. They are interpretations, not truths. The mind produces thoughts continuously, thousands of them every day. Some come from memory, some from fear, some from imagination, and some from hope. But you get to choose which ones you engage with. You are the observer, not the captive. When you see yourself as the observer, you create a healthy distance between you and your thoughts. Instead of feeling consumed, you feel empowered. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond with clarity. Learning to separate yourself from your thoughts is a practice of gentle awareness. When a thought arises, especially one that triggers anxiety or overthinking, pause and acknowledge it. Observe it without judgment. You might say internally, "This is just a thought, not a fact." This simple acknowledgement breaks the automatic cycle of overthinking. It stops the mind from spiraling into deeper layers of interpretation and fear. Every time you do this, you strengthen the part of you that is calm, grounded, and in control. Many thoughts are shaped by old experiences, past wounds, insecurities, or external influences. Sometimes your mind is not reflecting reality, it is reflecting memory. And memory is not always a reliable narrator. When you over-identify with your thoughts, You carry burdens that were never meant to define your present. You react to old fears as if they are happening right now. But when you detach your identity from your thinking, you begin to see how much of your mental noise is simply echoes of the past, not signals of the present. There is immense peace in realizing that you can witness a thought without obeying it. You can feel fear without believing that danger is certain. You can experience doubt without assuming you are incapable. You can observe overthinking without letting it dictate your emotions. This shift empowers you to respond rather than react. Your mind may generate a storm, but you do not have to step into the rain. Understanding that your thoughts are not you also opens the door to self-compassion. Instead of criticizing yourself for overthinking, you can approach your mind with kindness. You can see your thoughts as messages trying to protect you, even if they are misguided. When you treat your inner world with gentleness, overthinking begins to lose its intensity. You stop battling your mind and start guiding it. This perspective also helps you realize that unwanted thoughts do not mean something is wrong with you. Every mind produces random, intrusive, or irrational thoughts. What matters is how you relate to them. When you understand that thoughts are simply mental activity, you stop personalizing them. You stop judging yourself for them. They become background noise, noticed but not feared. Over time, this understanding strengthens your inner stability. You stop being swept away by every mental wave. You learn to let thoughts come and go without clinging to them. You return to your center more easily. You discover a deeper identity, one that is constant and untouched by the fluctuations of the mind. The more you practice separating your identity from your thoughts, the more freedom you experience. You reclaim your power. You reclaim your peace. And you finally realize that while your mind creates the noise, you are the one who decides how loud it gets. Overthinking cannot survive in the present moment because the present offers no space for the mind to wander, replay, or predict. It is the past that feeds regret and the future that feeds fear. The mind oscillates between these two dimensions, trying to correct what has already happened or control what has not yet occurred. But peace lives only in the now. When you anchor yourself in the present moment, you reclaim the only place where clarity, calm, and stability truly exist. The present moment is simple, but the mind complicates it. As you sit in a room, your body is here, yet your mind may be replaying yesterday's arguments, imagining tomorrow's failures, or weaving stories out of things that have not happened. The disconnect between where your body is and where your mind goes creates internal chaos. Grounding yourself closes that gap. It brings your awareness back to the one moment you can actually influence. Anchoring yourself does not require grand mindfulness exercises. It starts with noticing. Notice your breath as it flows in and out. Notice the sensation of your feet touching the ground. Notice the sounds around you. Notice the rise and fall of your emotions without chasing them. Each act of noticing pulls the mind out of the spiral of overthinking and brings it back to the present. It is like training a wandering child to come home gently, patiently, repeatedly. You will find that the present moment is almost always manageable. What overwhelms you are the stories your mind adds to it. A single task becomes stressful only when you attach fears of failure or comparisons to others. A simple delay becomes anxiety-inducing when you imagine worst-case outcomes. A harmless silence becomes torment when you start reading into it. The present moment itself is rarely the problem, the mind's projections are. When you stay rooted in the now, you strip away the unnecessary layers that create mental suffering. One powerful truth is that the mind cannot overthink while it is fully present. Presence requires attention, and attention leaves no room for spirals. This is why people often feel calmer when they engage in grounding activities, walking, praying, journaling, breathing deeply, or even doing something creative. These actions bring your awareness into the current moment and silence the noise of everything outside it. Presence is not an escape, it is a return. Anchoring yourself in the present also gives you perspective. When you are lost in overthinking, problems appear larger than they are. But when you pause and return to this moment, you realize that most fears exist only in your imagination. They are possibilities, not realities. In the now, you see what is actually happening, not what your mind insists might happen. That clarity allows you to respond to life rather than react to your thoughts. Overthinking often tries to convince you that you must solve everything at once. The present moment reminds you that you only need to deal with what is in front of you. This relieves an enormous amount of pressure. Life becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about taking the next right step. You begin to trust that the future will take care of itself when you take care of the now. Being anchored in the present does not mean denying the past or ignoring the future. It means not allowing them to steal the peace of the moment you are living. You learn from the past, you plan for the future, but you live here, right here, because this is where life is unfolding. Overthinking loses its grip when you repeatedly bring your mind back to this moment, reminding yourself that the only place power exists is in the present. With time and practice, the present moment becomes your refuge. It becomes the space where you breathe, reset, and reconnect with yourself. And in this space, overthinking weakens, clarity grows, and your mind finds the calm it was seeking all along. Replacing reaction with reflection is one of the most transformative shifts you can make in your journey to control your mind and escape the cycle of overthinking. Most overthinking is not caused by what happens to you, but by how quickly and emotionally you react to it. When something triggers you, an unexpected message, an uncertain situation, a memory, a tone of voice, your mind often jumps straight into defense mode. It begins interpreting, predicting, assuming, analyzing, and creating narratives faster than you can process them. Reaction is immediate, impulsive, and fueled by emotion. Reflection, however, is deliberate. It slows the mind down and invites clarity into the situation. When you react quickly, you give your thoughts unrestricted control. They begin racing without guidance, taking you into mental spirals that feel overwhelming. Reaction is a reflex. It doesn't pause to question whether the thought is true or helpful. It simply follows where the fear leads. That's why overthinking escalates so quickly, because reaction pours fuel on every thought that appears. But reflection interrupts this cycle. It gives you a moment to breathe, observe, and evaluate. Instead of jumping into the story your mind creates, you step back to understand what is really happening. Reflection does not mean overanalyzing. It is the opposite. Overanalyzing comes from fear. Reflection comes from awareness. Reflection asks gentle questions. Is this thought accurate? Is it helpful? Am I reacting to the situation or to my assumptions about it? These questions create distance between you and your thoughts. They allow you to respond intentionally rather than emotionally. This space between stimulus and response is where your power lies. Many times, the things you react to most intensely are not the things themselves, but the emotions they trigger within you. A delay may trigger your fear of being unimportant. A disagreement may trigger your fear of not being understood. A mistake may trigger your fear of inadequacy. Reaction pulls you deeper into those fears. Reflection helps you recognize them. When you reflect, you become aware of what the situation is awakening inside you, rather than being consumed by the emotion itself. This awareness brings understanding, and understanding brings peace. Reflection also encourages patience. It teaches you that not every answer is needed immediately. Not every situation requires instant interpretation, and not every emotion deserves a reaction. Sometimes the best response is silence. Sometimes it is waiting. Sometimes it is stepping away until your mind settles. The pause itself becomes an act of strength. In that pause, your thoughts lose momentum, your emotions soften, and your clarity rises to the surface. When you practice reflection, you begin making decisions from wisdom rather than worry. You see the difference between what is real and what is imagined. You start noticing patterns, how certain thoughts repeat, how specific things trigger you, how your mind tends to exaggerate or catastrophize. These insights aren't meant to judge you. They help you understand yourself. And the more you understand yourself, the less your mind can overwhelm you. Reflection transforms your relationship with your thoughts. It teaches you that you don't have to act on every emotion, believe every fear, or accept every conclusion your mind presents. You become more intentional, more grounded, more in control. You respond with clarity instead of reacting with confusion. And over time, this practice builds inner stability. The beauty of reflection is that it does not require perfect calmness. It simply requires a pause, a breath, a moment, a step back. This small act interrupts the automatic cycle of overthinking and replaces it with mindful awareness. It is in these quiet pauses that your mind resets. You begin to realize that your thoughts do not control you. You control how you relate to them. As reflection becomes a habit, your inner world shifts. Chaos becomes quieter. Emotions become easier to understand. Fear becomes less convincing. And your responses become aligned with who you want to be, not what your overthinking tries to turn you into. This is the power of choosing reflection over reaction. It gives you back your mind, your peace, and your sense of control. Surrendering what you cannot control is one of the most profound steps toward freeing your mind from the grip of overthinking. At the root of most mental spirals is the unconscious belief that if you think enough, worry enough, analyze enough, or predict enough, you can somehow guarantee safety or certainty. But the truth is that no amount of overthinking can prevent discomfort, failure, disappointment, or change. Life moves with a rhythm far greater than our attempts to control it, and peace begins when you stop trying to force what was never yours to manage. Overthinking arises when you confuse responsibility with control. You take responsibility for your actions, your choices, your growth, but you cannot control outcomes, timelines, or other people's behavior. Yet the mind often clings to these uncontrollable factors, hoping that constant vigilance will protect you. This creates a heavy internal pressure, as if you are carrying the whole world on your shoulders. Surrender lifts that weight. It reminds you that your only obligation is to do your part. The rest belongs to a higher order of life that you are not meant to micromanage. Surrender does not mean giving up, nor does it mean becoming passive or careless. It means releasing the illusion that you are in charge of everything. It is an act of inner trust. Trust in your ability to handle whatever comes. Trust in the timing of your life. Trust that what is meant for you will not require force or fear to sustain. When you surrender, you stop wrestling with the unknown. You stop trying to control outcomes through mental tension. Instead, you learn to flow with life rather than against it. This shift transforms the way you experience uncertainty. Instead of reacting with panic, you begin responding with openness. Instead of fearing the unknown, you view it as a space where possibilities live. Overthinking turns uncertainty into a threat. Surrender turns it into a teacher. You start seeing challenges as growth, delays as redirection, and endings as new beginnings. This mindset frees the mind from the exhausting habit of catastrophizing every change or unanswered question. Surrendering what you cannot control also nurtures emotional resilience. When you release the need to control outcomes, your peace no longer depends on perfect circumstances. You become centered even when life feels unpredictable. You stop chasing certainty and instead cultivate inner steadiness. This makes you stronger, not weaker. You learn to face life with grace instead of gripping it with fear. One of the most powerful effects of surrender is that it grounds you deeply in the present. When you let go of trying to manage what is beyond you, your mind returns to what is within your reach, your actions, your intentions, your attitude, your effort. You redirect your mental energy from imaginary futures to the reality unfolding before you. This shift alone can dissolve layers of anxiety. The mind becomes calmer because it is no longer scattering itself in every direction. Surrender also brings clarity. When you release what is not yours to carry, you create space to hear your intuition, to notice opportunities, and to understand what truly matters. Overthinking clutters your inner world with noise and worry. Surrender clears it. It allows the answers you were desperately searching for to clutters appear naturally without force. Often the clarity you seek arrives only after you stop trying to control everything. Most importantly, surrender reminds you that peace is not something you chase, it is something you choose. You choose it each time you let go of what drains your spirit. You choose it each time you stop trying to predict the future. You choose it each time you trust that you can handle life as it comes. In this trust, the mind quiets. In this letting go, your heart becomes stronger. In this surrender, overthinking loses its power. When you learn to release what is beyond your control, you step into a new way of living, one rooted in inner confidence, calmness, and clarity. You finally give yourself permission to breathe, to rest, and to trust the unfolding of your life without fear. And that is where true mental freedom begins.